spotting Coca-Cola over their links with the Olympics in China. All that coming up, but first, it's your news update. I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 12 o'clock. Troops are being deployed at London hospitals as NHS staff absences due to COVID rise 59% in a week. The Ministry of Defence has sent 200 personnel and talks are underway to expand the scheme across the UK. The new recruits are expected to be in the field for the next 3 weeks. Bupa former Chief Medical Officer Andrew Vallance-Owen told GB News that the move is a positive development for the NHS.
People should be reassured that we've had the sense to bring the army in. We saw during the crisis last year or earlier this year, last year now, of course, that the Nightingale hospitals were almost built and staffed by the army, and they did a brilliant job. They didn't have to be used much in the end. So I think I'm reassured by the fact that it is recognised that we need to bring the army in.
Boris Johnson's been criticised by his standards advisor over lost WhatsApp messages in the Downing Street flat renovation row. The newly released messages reveal Johnson discussed Lord Brownlow's plans for a so-called Great Exhibition at the same time as the financing for the flat. Labour says the messages with the Tory donor raise questions about cash for access. They've asked the Common Standards Commissioner to investigate. The Attorney-General is considering referring the Colston statue toppling case to the Court of Appeal. It comes after 4 people were cleared of tearing down a monument of slave trader Edward Colston during a Black Lives Matter protest in Bristol in June 2020. Suella Braverman said the verdict is causing confusion and may trigger a review. Senior judges would have the chance to clarify the law for future cases. A second juror in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial has reportedly claimed to have been sexually abused as a child. It follows reports earlier this week that juror Scotty David shared his experiences of abuse during deliberation. A hearing on January the 19th will decide if Maxwell will be retried. Legal analyst Anne Bremner told GB News that a retrial is likely.
He went into the jury room and used what's called extrinsic evidence, which is his experience as a victim, to educate the other jurors. When you have the non-disclosure in jury selection and then the injection of your own extrinsic evidence, which might be a life experience, there's a presumption that that is prejudicial and there could be a new trial, that combination.
Kazakhstan's president has ordered security forces to fire without warning, adding that those who fail to surrender will be destroyed. It comes amid a violent crackdown on anti-government protests sparked by a fuel price hike. Around 2,500 Russian-led forces have been deployed to Kazakhstan at the request of the country's president.
The counter-terrorist operation continues. The militants have not laid down their arms. They continue to commit crimes or are preparing for them. The fight against them must be pursued to the end. Whoever does not surrender will be destroyed.
A second tennis player has reportedly had their visa cancelled by immigration officials ahead of the Australian Open. Renata Varacova is now detained in the same hotel as world number 1 Novak Djokovic and has been told she needs to leave the country. Djokovic is awaiting the outcome of an appeal with authorities over a COVID-19 medical exemption. It's reported that one other player may also be under investigation. The Australian Home Affairs Minister says everyone is treated fairly in custody.
Mr Djokovic is not being held captive in Australia. He is free to leave at any time that he chooses to do so, and Border Force will actually facilitate. We treat all people who are in immigration detention fairly, equitably.
Detectives investigating the murder of a man in Brentford back in November have released CCTV images of 2 potential witnesses. Police say the men aren't in trouble, but they may have witnessed the killing of 20-year-old Ali Abubakar Ali. An 82-year-old woman also suffered stab wounds but survived. A 37-year-old man has already been charged. The 79th Golden Globes will be a private event. The Hollywood Foreign Press Association says the ceremony will no longer be live streamed. What's more, the winners will be announced in real time on social media. The event's due to take place on Sunday with no red carpet and no celebrity hosts. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour, but for now it's back to Isabel and the briefing.
Hello and welcome. It's my first show since Christmas break, and I'm going to take you from the corridors of power at Westminster to the Coca-Cola headquarters in America and all the way to Kazakhstan to look at what's going on today and how things are shaping up for the year ahead. Now, in the run-up to Christmas, Boris Johnson looked to be on very thin ice. There were weeks of shocking headlines about Downing Street partying during lockdowns. There was that ridiculous Peppa Pig speech to business leaders. And after the Owen Paterson sleaze scandal over lobbying, there was a dreadful by-election result for the Tories that resulted in them losing a safe Conservative seat to the Lib Dems. In mid-December, Labour surged to a 9-point lead in the polls, so a really good position for them there. The majority of voters in one survey said they thought the Prime Minister should resign. And privately, so did a fair few Tory MPs. Today, Labour's still ahead in the polls, but Boris Johnson's still very much in Downing Street, and perhaps he's regaining the initiative. One thing I've certainly learned as a political journalist is that it takes a hell of a lot to remove a Prime Minister who doesn't want to go. And for all their fighting talk in private, when it comes to the crunch, MPs themselves are very reluctant to do what it takes to force a party leader out. It's just too risky for them career-wise. So as the new year begins, all the talk in number 10 will be about how to relaunch the Prime Minister. Having faced down a lot of calls for more coronavirus restrictions, Boris Johnson has suggested that life in the UK could be back to normal in a few weeks' time, and that would put us way ahead of other European countries. To show he means business, he's even got a new haircut. Here he is, before the new year. Here's his prime ministerial haystack in its full blonde glory. And here he was earlier this week. Look at that makeover. It matches his posh flat renovation. But with a huge crisis looming over energy bills and cost of living, can he really turn things around? We've also got more revelations today about that Downing Street flat renovation even, a story that just keeps on giving. Well, joining me to talk about New Year, New Boris is Polly Mckenzie, who certainly knows a thing or two about life inside number 10. Polly was Special Advisor to Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg during the coalition years and is now Chief Executive of the cross-party think tank Demos. And I'm also joined down the line by Paul Staines, better known as Guido Fawkes, the King of Westminster gossip. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for joining me. Polly, are you detecting signs of an imminent prime ministerial relaunch?
I think it was certainly the hope of all those in number 10 that Christmas and the New Year would act as a kind of fire break to all of these stories, and they'd be able to come out fighting in the New Year with, sure, I mean, a new haircut is a low bar, isn't it, when it comes
Not for Boris, it isn't.
Governing the country. Well, every so often we get these stories that he's had a haircut and he's given up drinking and he's getting fit. And a bit like my attempts at diets, they seem to last about 2 months and then suddenly it's all chips and crisps again. So, you know, we shouldn't expect too much in terms of a Boris relaunch, but I certainly think that is what they are planning. And I think the timing is looking at when can they come to the end of these Plan B restrictions around COVID? You know, the one thing that's absolutely played into the Prime Minister's hands over the course of this break is the way Omicron has played out, in that it did turn out to be a much milder variant. That doesn't mean there's no problems in the NHS, as you've been reporting. There's still substantial problems in the NHS and other public services, but we're not seeing those ventilated patients. We're not seeing those deaths. And that helps him. It means he doesn't need to try and...
huge relief in Downing Street.
Huge relief. And it means that they can look forward to a moment when maybe they can get rid of the restrictions towards the end of this month. I've heard the rumour 23rd, 26th of the month. And I think that's the moment where they'll be thinking about how do we get back to the policy agenda around levelling up that they believe that their voters want to hear about.
Paul, if I can bring you in here. I mean, this is all very well, but once again today, we've got new revelations about the Prime Minister's private messages to a Conservative peer friend of his, a rich man who was going to help him renovate the flat he described as still a bit of a tip. There must be a lot of dismay in Number 10 that these stories just keep on coming. The new year has not marked an end to this saga.
I think the feeling in Number 10 is that these stories wound but won't kill, and that they will lose salience with the newspapers. I mean, the parties before Christmas made people very angry. I imagine viewers were just livid that the people making restrictions on us were ignoring the restrictions themselves. But I think the process stories about the flat renovation won't pay off in terms of damaging him. And it's because at the end of the day, he's ended up paying $112,000 to renovate a flat of which he's a short-term tenant, possibly.
Yes. So, in a sense, then you think that story is sort of has peaked and reached its worst point for Downing Street. At this point, then, perhaps the main danger is becoming a more serious one, which is the growing cost of living crisis. And there must be a significant concern in Number 10 about how they're going to manage that.
Well, you don't need to be a fortune teller to see that come April, we're going to get tax rises, corporation tax rises, cost of living rises, the cap is coming off on the energy, and then in May, we have local elections. This is not a happy set of circumstances for voters or for those trying to get re-elected. So I can't see all that standing as is. Something has to give. Now, they're talking today about targeted ways of mitigating the energy price rises. People on low incomes are going to get payments. It all sounds a bit Gordon Brown, if you like, tinkering. I wonder if the national insurance hike isn't in danger.
I think certainly there's been quite a lot of discussion about that. The mood is darkening on that national insurance hike and how it can be justified. In a sense, perhaps Number 10 is glad to be talking about policy rather than Boris Johnson's judgment and his personality. Polly, do you think, given what Paul says there about the kind of the heat going out of the Downing Street renovation story, and obviously they've passed the lockdown partying revelations now, do you think that those around Boris Johnson and the Prime Minister himself will still be nervous about his actual position, or are they able to now move on to policy with some confidence?
I think, as you explained earlier, the bar for getting rid of a sitting Prime Minister is
very high,
extremely high.
Yeah.
And do you remember during the Brexit kind of shenanigans when Theresa May was the Prime Minister, there were so many moments where she looked so weak that it just felt like surely they'll get rid of her. And I think part of the calculation was a hope that she would somehow get Brexit done so that you could have a kind of clean-skinned Prime Minister, somebody who could start afresh. And I think Conservative MPs will be thinking about that in terms of both coronavirus and this kind of cost of living pressure spring. In that if you want to be the next Prime Minister, you probably want to be the next Prime Minister towards the end of this year, once some of those kind of lumps in the road have been passed, rather than immediately, where you have to take on the challenges of potential new variants and you have to take on the challenges of trying to deal with the energy prices. They want Boris Johnson to be blamed for everything that goes wrong this spring.
So, Paul, in a sense then, Boris famously said, let's get Brexit done. Is it a case that he's now got to get coronavirus done? And at that point, ironically, he becomes more vulnerable, particularly with the May elections. How significant do you think those will be? These are local elections.
Tory MPs will wait to see the result of the May elections before they start considering putting letters into Graham Brady and the 1922 committee. I don't think there's an appetite for leadership rivals to go for the juggler right now. In fact, that could backfire on them. And I agree with Polly. If you're a Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss or Priti Patel, you will be thinking, let him take all the flack. But one thing you've got to remember about Boris Johnson, he gets out of scrapes. It famously described as a greased piglet by David Cameron. He could reap a great reward for taking gambles on going fast with the COVID exit faster than the rest of the world, perhaps, and he could be seen to have had a successful COVID battle. It's not impossible. If he does that and the May elections are flat or the Tories lose a minimal amount of seats, you never know. Boris is a great campaigner.
So if I know you're a betting man, Paul, are you putting money on him surviving and leading the party into the next election, or would you be a bit wary on that one?
I noticed the bookies were offering bets on him going this year. I think they were saying as a 4 or 5 to 1 chance. I would not take that bet. I don't think he will be. Party conferences where, over the summer, say it was a terrible May elections, over the summer there might be some manoeuvres, but party conferences in the autumn are generally where these things get, where the rivals advertise their wares or put forward their case. I can't see him going this year. No way.
Polly, what do you think?
I think, again, if you're thinking about wanting to be the next leader, wanting to be the next Prime Minister...
And trust me, a lot of them are.
I'm sure you are too. No, we all are. We all know. But so is that question of how much damage can the Conservative Party take before it needs to be a kind of time to move on?
Yeah.
And
wanting a run-in for the next person.
Exactly. So I think he could possibly last this year. I actually think it's pretty unlikely that he will lead the party into the next general election. But I think one of the real challenges is those economic fundamentals that, again, you guys have been talking about, is this kind of cost of living challenge. Even if the economy starts to recover, and even if we are ahead of the rest of the world, the supply chain chaos that is still ongoing means that, inflationary pressures are not constrained to the energy market, and wages are not surging up as what we were promised as a result of Brexit. And so, what is the offer to people?
And you haven't mentioned the NHS, which is going to be at least as big a crisis
Completely agree.
as the energy situation.
If you go back to 97, right, how did Tony Blair win that huge majority? It was basically a combination of 3 things. 1, the Conservatives no longer looking competent on the economy. Number 2, massive scandal and sleaze. And number 3, huge waiting lists in the NHS. And I think the real danger for the Conservative Party is they're in danger of having all 3 of those components of the 97 catastrophe facing them at the next election.
I don't envy those Downing Street advisors. I'm sure you're glad to be out of it too. Thank you very much, Polly Mckenzie and Paul Staines from the Guido Fawkes website. Thank you, Paul. So coming up on the briefing, Russia sends troops to Kazakhstan to crush a people's uprising. We'll speak to the chairman of the House of Commons Defence Committee. But before that, let's take a look at the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Not for the first time this week, there's a cold breeze blowing out there, bringing some sunshine, certainly across eastern areas, but also quite a few wintry showers in the west, so sleet, hail, and in places some snow. Low pressure is dominating up to the north, and we've got this little kind of breakaway weather front bringing thicker cloud and wet weather to South Wales and southwest England. That's mostly rain, but it does have some snow mixed in over the hills of Devon and Somerset for a time. Further north, we do have some sleet and snow showers packing into northwest England, western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and we'll continue to see those wintry showers through the rest of the day. Much of the east, bar the odd shower, dry and bright with some sunshine, but it feels cold. Temperatures 3 or 4, add on that wind, it feels sub-zero. We'll keep a few scattered showers going across the west through this evening, but for most it turns dry and cold. We will see a frost forming, certainly early on, but look at this, more cloud and rain then comes in through the night, and that will have the effect of lifting the temperatures. So frosty this evening. By morning, most places will be back above freezing. As the wet weather arrives, it will bring some snow across the hills of Scotland, certainly for a time on Saturday morning, but mostly it's just a wet old Saturday morning, and the rain likely to turn heavy at times over England and Wales, particularly through the afternoon across the south, with some gusty winds along the south coast too. Many places, though, brightening up through the afternoon with some sunshine, and after we start, pretty mild. Temperature actually dropping a little bit through the afternoon, but still milder than it has been. Quite a few showers then coming into western areas during Saturday evening. Some snow likely to continue over the higher routes across western Scotland. And then we go into Sunday. We'll keep the showers going in the west, certainly initially, but much of the east will be dry and bright. And for many, we should see a bit more sunshine on Sunday compared to Saturday. Goodbye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello again from Westminster. We're going all the way to Kazakhstan to discuss the extraordinary people's uprising that's going on there right now. Now, if you're anything like me, you don't know much about Kazakhstan. You might know it used to be part of the Soviet Union, but it's not exactly a big power player on the world stage. So why should you care that there's been an attempted revolution and the government has fallen? Importantly, the president is still hanging on, thanks largely to Russia. And that's why this matters, because once again, what we have here is President Putin of Russia moving into another country to exploit unrest there. Quite likely, it's unrest that he has deliberately been fueling to expand his sphere of influence. And that has big implications for all of us. What I certainly hadn't realised until this week is just how big Kazakhstan is. It's actually the size of the whole of Western Europe. And I also wasn't aware just how rich it is in natural resources. In fact, it has 3% of global oil reserves, and also important gas and coal sectors, which may explain partly why so many world leaders are interested in it. It has borders with China to the north and Russia to the east, so it's caught between two superpowers, both of which have been very keen to help the president in his hour of need. The unrest kicked off because the price of liquid petroleum gas, which many people there use to fuel their cars, suddenly doubled, and protesters came out onto the streets against the authoritarian government, and quite soon the trouble escalated and led to bloodshed. Now, seeing the scale of anger, the president restored price caps on fuel and fired his cabinet, but that hasn't stopped the fighting. So now he's accepted an offer of help from the Kremlin. Joining me now to discuss why all this matters is the MP Tobias Ellwood, Tory MP and chairman of the Commons Defence Select Committee, who knows a lot about this region. Thanks for joining us, Tobias. What's your understanding of what's going on in Kazakhstan right now?
Well, given the fact that you said you didn't know much about this, you've just given a fantastic summary, and I'm pleased that you are, in fact, covering this. Look at the news over the last few days, and people seem more concerned about a tennis player getting into Australia than what was going on in Kazakhstan. And you're absolutely right. This is an important country, most associated probably with Borat, which they didn't like very much. But it is huge. It's not only got huge gas and oil reserves, it's also got a lot of rare earth minerals too. When I visited the country a few years ago as foreign minister, I came back and my takeaway was this was like going to the Gulf in the 1930s. This was an opportunity for Britain to invest, to double the size of our embassy, to help with their trade, to help with their education, to help with their democratic processes, as they themselves were exploring avenues to move away from being that satellite state as they were under the Soviet Union. And what we saw in the president there, Nazarbayev, is now he stepped down a couple of years ago. Tokayev has come in and instead, but very much it's Nazarbayev that still runs the roost there. You can only run any country for so long using fear alone. It wasn't the gas prices just, it was actually the fact that this was a repressed regime, not listening to the people themselves who were calling for change. The change didn't come with the change of presidency. And the change is now, rather than actually recognizing and embracing the need for change today, what have the presidents done? They've called in help from Russia, which is absolutely the wrong call.
Yes, I mean, the involvement of Russia now escalates this massively in terms of the geopolitical implications. I understand that today troops have been given an order to kill without warning. Is that what you've picked up on?
Yes, it is. I mean, this is typical playbook out of the autocrats' way to respond to events such as this. Firstly, labeling those demonstrators as terrorists. That gives an excuse for the police to operate within them. Plainclothes police looking for the leaders, then actually taking them out, dragging them onto buses, closing down social media so that nobody can communicate. And then on top of that, call in, the big boys from Russia itself. And Russia will be very, very concerned about this. I think spooked, in fact, is probably the right word in the Kremlin right now. They didn't want this. They certainly were looking and focusing on potentially invading eastern Ukraine, which is another big story that we've not given justice to. But there'll also be concerns, and you touched on it, by China, because there's parts of China where they are absolutely, suppressing the views there, of keeping down and silencing the peoples there. And they'll be looking at what's going on with Kazakhstan with very wary eyes indeed.
Now, you say that the Russians didn't want this. I'm not so sure that this doesn't present a very juicy opportunity for Russia. It's very keen on exploiting this type of situation in neighbouring countries. And of course, there are rich oil reserves and other minerals there. Don't you think this is actually quite convenient for President Putin in those respects?
I understand that they now see this as an opportunity to reassert the relationship, that bond, if you like, and the seniority, if you like, of Moscow and Almaty. But actually, I don't think it's in the regime's interest as well. You've given a taster to the people of Kazakhstan to say, actually, they can get over their fear, that actually they are united by their anger against this regime, the endemic corruption, the lack of political rights, the poor economic outlook, and the fact that they are now looking over their shoulders at other parts of the world saying, I want some of that. I want those freedoms. We are essentially a very wealthy, resource-wealthy, rich country. Why aren't we actually seeing some of that wealth in our towns and our cities, going to our families, going to the people of the country rather than the regime itself?
Thank you for that really good summary, Tobias. And just one last question. I mean, China was quite keen to get involved here too, weren't they? How significant is it that Kazakhstan has pivoted to Russia and not China in this situation?
Whether Kazakhstan's pivoted or whether Russia was first off out of the blocks, so to speak, is a different matter. But you're right to say that there's almost a bun fight going on with Kazakhstan. You pointed at the beginning of the size of this country, the wealth. In the next 20 to 30 years, as I alluded at the beginning, this is going to become a regional power base. They'll become one of the most developed 30 countries in the world in the next couple of decades. So China will want to be advancing its one belt, one road into Kazakhstan. It can't do that if Kazakhstan now feels obliged to look back towards Moscow.
Thank you so much, Tobias Elwood, and I hope you come on again to talk about what is clearly a very important and growing issue. So we'll have a bit more on Russian adventurism coming up, and we'll speak to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, about the troops being sent in to London hospitals to deal with COVID cases. But first, it's your news update.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. Troops are being deployed at London hospitals as NHS staff absences due to COVID rise 59% in a week. The Ministry of Defence has sent 200 personnel and talks are underway to expand the scheme across the UK. The new recruits are expected to be in the field for the next 3 weeks. Boris Johnson has been criticised by his standards advisor over lost WhatsApp messages in the Downing Street flat renovation row. The newly released chat reveals Johnson discussed Lord Brownlow's plans for a so-called Great Exhibition at the same time as the financing for the flat. Labour says the messages with the Tory donor raise questions about cash for access and asked the Common Standards Commissioner to investigate. The Attorney-General is considering referring the Colston statue toppling case to the Court of Appeal. It comes after 4 people were cleared of tearing down a monument of slave trader Edward Colston during a Black Lives Matter protest in Bristol in June 2020. Suella Braverman said the verdict is causing confusion and may trigger a review. Senior judges would have the chance to clarify the law for future cases. A second tennis player has had their visa cancelled by immigration officials ahead of the Australian Open. Renata Vorakova is being detained in the same hotel as world number 1 Novak Djokovic and has been told she must leave the country. It's reported that one other player may also be under investigation. It's 12:32. I'll be back with a full update at the top of the hour. See you then.
I don't know about you, Anne, but I am fed up with the fact that the news is so depressing at the moment.
Yeah, and everybody says it to you, don't they? They actually say, I can't bear to watch the news anymore because it's so bad all the time. And I think at weekends, especially at weekends, I think we're going to shine a bit of sunshine on the news as well. Not relentlessly, but, you know, show what good there is.
Yeah, we've got to cover what is actually happening, but we can also look at the good things in life, the good things that are happening in communities up and down the country.
Yeah, and we'll put a smile on it. And if you smile back, we'll feel it too.
We will. Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the uprising in Kazakhstan and Russia's attempts to crush it with their own troops. And we were talking with the chairman of the Commons Defence Select Committee. Let's speak now, though, to an academic expert, Dr. Diana Kuderberger-Nova from Cambridge University, a Kazakhstani herself and an expert in the region. Thank you, Dr. Diana. What's been happening in Kazakhstan over the past 48 hours? Has it been completely unexpected, or has this been building for quite some time?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I think it's very important to distinguish between different protests and layers of what's going on. So the protest started initially as, like a peaceful protest, and that's what a lot of groups are still pushing for, to say that there are peaceful protesters shouldn't be branded alongside with these violent elements that are definitely out on the streets of certain cities, precisely in Almaty, in large amounts. And we need to really distinguish that there are both of these groups are on the streets, and there are peaceful protests alongside the violent protests. But in the beginning, the initial protest was fueled definitely by the socioeconomic grievances, by the inequalities, widespread corruption, and things that were building up for over a decade. And also people are demanding, the peaceful protesters were demanding and still are demanding the political reforms. They want the changes because they connect political reforms to economic change that they're desiring. And unfortunately, what happened is that certain elements took the opportunity and started, basically coming out on the streets and attacking law enforcement officers, but also attacking civilians. And we're now hearing about a number of deaths among civilians from the hands of these violent and criminal elements. So we really need to distinguish these two forces and distinguish that the violent forces are the ones who are using this peaceful protest in their own interests and reasons, whatever these are.
And of course, that plays directly into the hands of the regime, doesn't it? Because it can paint these protesters as sort of terrorists and violent individuals and thus justify a very heavy-handed crackdown. Where do you think we are in terms of fatalities in this? Numbers seem to be quite hard to ascertain at this point.
Well, we're still getting numbers in terms of deaths. Unfortunately, these numbers are going to be high because the violence is unprecedented for the country. We've never had this level of, violent clashes before. We had protests in the country, as I said, for over a decade. These were usually very peaceful protests, and there were some clashes with the police, but they were rarely leading to casualties. The biggest one was in 2011 in Zhanaozen, in the industrial city in the west. But I think, the numbers that I'm hearing right now are counting in hundreds. And these are in different cities, but largely Almaty, the major city, is the one that has the most number of deaths at the moment. And these deaths, tragically, are happening on both sides. It's both law enforcement officers that have been killed and
is there
the
any
civilians.
sign of it spreading beyond the main city there, or is this largely very much concentrated in that city?
I think Almaty is definitely central in terms of the spread of violence. There are some comments about violence in other regional cities like Taldykorgan and Taraz, but the security and police forces are able to take these places under control because these are more localized spaces. The protest is still peaceful and ongoing in the west of Kazakhstan, where it emerged initially in the beginning of this month, in the beginning of the week as well. But largely, the biggest problem right now is, I think, in Almaty.
And just very briefly, is there any real prospect of any kind of political reform, or will this just be crushed one way or another within the next few days?
Well, there is a hope, and we do have a number. Of course, the protest is still largely spontaneous in terms of we don't have formal opposition. We don't have the channels for specific formal institutions or parties that are forming. This is a very distinct situation from any other societies where you, for example, would have certain groups and so on. But there's definitely some movements that have formed before this protest. There are political activists that are already coming up with their declaration, responding to the latest presidential address, mentioning that they are not the terrorists and they expect the president to have the dialogue with them and hopefully not to crack it down completely and leave some space for the further democratization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diana Kuderberger-Nova from Cambridge University. Now, one place where the intervention of the armed forces will be rather more welcome is in London's hospitals. Hundreds of troops, a British Army, have been sent in to wards to help relieve some of the pressure on overwhelmed NHS staff. With me is Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. So, Mark, what's the situation? How many have actually gone in from the armed forces and what are they going to be doing?
Well, at the moment, it's 200 at a number of trusts in the London area to help out. Now, 60 of those are actually medical staff from the ranks of the military tri-service, as I understand it. So Army, RAF, the Navy, they'll all help out as required.
Are they generally sort of paramedic trained rather than actual doctors?
So you will have doctors and there will be nurses from the Army Medical Corps as well, the other military medical corps within the other services who can help out. But actually, the most of them are going to help in things like portering, that kind of issue. It's a staff crisis.
Logistics almost.
Yeah, and it's a staff crisis that is building across the NHS as elsewhere in the public sector and private sector. We're all being hit by Omicron and people are isolating. It's being felt acutely, of course, within the NHS because there are patients with Omicron. It's being passed really quite rapidly throughout hospitals. There's been a 60% increase in recent days in the number of absences, 35,000 people, I think, across the NHS who are currently isolating at the moment because they've tested for Omicron. And those jobs need to be filled, obviously, in order to continue to give patient care.
And those NHS staff that are off, how many of those are actually ill and how many of them are effectively being ordered to self-isolate even though they're asymptomatic? Do we know? I think the majority are, and probably the vast majority are not ill, but have tested positive for Omicron. But they have to follow the rules, and the rules say that they have to spend a significant period of time isolating until they can come back to work. And that's where the problem is arising. And because there is such a spread of the infection within hospitals anyway, we know that's been a problem right from the start with all the various variants of COVID, particularly with Omicron. It's spreading to members of staff really rather quickly. So you have got now 200, as I say, involved in 200 members of the military involved in London. And these are all in London trusts.
Yeah.
Is there any way they could be spread out across the country? Are there more?
I think so, Isabel, yeah. The various heads of the militaries have been talking about the potential for assisting in other parts of the country if they're required. We should say there are 1,800 military personnel who have been involved in helping out across the country anyway because of this Omicron variant. If you remember, of course, before Christmas, we had a crisis within the ambulance service in Scotland where they were requiring, because of the caseload and the number of paramedics who were off, help, and they received military assistance. So I think we're probably likely to see more military personnel rolled out to other NHS trusts. Remember, we've got at least, I think, 18 NHS trusts that have declared critical incidents because of the rate of Omicron spread within their hospitals and obviously the staff shortages.
So the government will just have to hope that we are actually at peak Omicron at this point, because it can't get much worse in terms of the NHS. Well, maybe it can. The
good news is that despite obviously the staff shortage, because there's a linger effect that they have to stay off for longer, we appear to have kind of plateaued, I think, in London, and the cases are beginning to subside. So,
and actually, we've not seen awful pictures of patients in corridors or being treated on floors, and some of the dreadful stuff you quite typically see in a winter crisis for the NHS. So hopefully we're nearing the end of the worst. Thank you very much, Mark White. Now, it's the cause, and it's less than a month now till the Winter Olympics, hosted by one of the most sinister regimes in the world. Yep, that's China, the country that gave the world COVID, then cashed in on the consequences, making billions by flogging testing kits and PPE. China, the country that only has one political party, the Communist Party, and simply imprisons any Chinese citizens who dare question the regime. The country that steals Western intellectual property on an industrial scale to secure economic advantage. The country that tells its people how many children they can have. The country that gives each of its citizens a credit rating based on their behaviour, which determines whether they're allowed to do basic things, like buy a plane ticket, buy a house, or take out a loan. And if people criticise any of this, they might as well forget it, especially if they're a public figure and speak out, when they will quite simply disappear. Worst of all, this is a regime that has incarcerated well over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs, possibly as many as 1.8 million, according to some estimates. And these people are being held in concentration camps. Officially, the camps are known as vocational education and training centres. This is the largest scale detention of ethnic and religious minorities since the Second World War. Thousands of mosques have been destroyed, there's forced labour, and hundreds of thousands of children have been forcibly separated from their parents and sent off to boarding schools. And yet, China will still be hosting one of the highest profile events in international sport. It is a golden opportunity for this regime to present a legitimate facade. Now, the UK, the US, Canada and Australia have all announced diplomatic boycotts. But what about corporate sponsors? What are companies like Coca-Cola and Airbnb doing sponsoring this event? Well, with me to discuss whether corporate sponsors should be pulling out of the Games is a Conservative peer, Lord Hayward, who used to work, I think, for Coca-Cola, didn't she? Yes. And has been speaking out on this issue in the House of Lords. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, hitherto, the emphasis in terms of the controversy on the Beijing Olympics has been on whether there should be a diplomatic boycott, whether indeed the athletes should go. You've been looking at who's sponsoring these games and whether they really should be.
Yes. It's always unfair on the athletes. When you get a major sporting event, you had the problem in Russia and the like with Moscow Olympics. And people automatically turn to the athletes and say, well, you shouldn't go. But that's the high point of their sporting career.
Yes.
And therefore, it's not fair on them. But there wouldn't be an Olympics in Beijing if it weren't for the sponsors. And as you've just identified, Coca-Cola, Airbnb, Procter & Gamble, Total, the French company, they're all sponsoring it to the extent of huge sums of money.
Right. What kind of money are we talking about?
We're talking probably, and the companies won't say precisely what the sums of money are, but the reality is Coca-Cola knows how much.
Yeah.
As I said in the House of Lords yesterday, it's one of the most centralised companies that I've ever been involved in, ever worked with. And they will know precisely how much they're spending. So when they say we don't know, etc., it's rubbish. But we think it's probably over $100 million and probably well in excess of that.
And this is huge advertising opportunity for them. They say that, you know, they've been sponsoring the Olympics for, 100 years, something like that. Of course, that means that they've been sponsoring quite a lot of dubious Olympic Games, haven't they?
They have. If you read their website and just go straight onto the link for the Olympic Games, it says that they've been sponsoring them for over 100 years, which means they sponsored the Berlin Olympics in 1936.
Yeah.
Moscow,
yeah.
1980. All the controversies. Now, I'm not against sports sponsorship because sports sponsorship, you need it. I'm involved in sport a lot, and most sports clubs could not survive without it. But when you sponsor an event, you know you're taking a risk as a company, and you try and draw it up closely so that you don't face those risks. But you build in a force majeure clause.
Yes.
So if something goes wrong, you can withdraw as the sponsor. And the parallel I draw, Pepsi sponsored Michael Jackson.
Right.
And immediately the controversy arose.
They were out of
They
there.
were out.
Yeah.
And Coca-Cola have been asked by American politicians, what are you doing in Beijing? And they just come out with bland responses.
They absolutely do, or no responses at all. So in the interest of fairness, I did, of course, contact Coca-Cola last night. I tried multiple avenues, actually. I tried their London press office. It was 5:36 when I called, and the office was shut. There was apparently an ability to leave a text, a phone message, a voicemail, but the voicemail was full. Perhaps that was you bombarding them. I then thought, well, look, I'm not going to leave it there. I'll call their American HQ, which I did. They don't seem to have an operational press office either. They certainly don't advertise one, which I thought was extraordinary, given how big this company is. I eventually got through to somebody called Amanda or something like that. It was very pleasant and didn't have a clue what I was talking about. So eventually I gave up. But we know what Coca-Cola's response to this is. They say that they don't choose where the Olympics are located. They're not interested in that. This is all about sponsoring the athletes and their amazing feats. But I don't really think that's a good enough get-out clause, do you?
No. Any athlete will tell you that they, as athletes, have no influence. Olympic Games are chosen on the basis of, A, does a government want to invest the time and money, whether it be London in 2012 or Beijing in 2022. So the governments are involved. The sponsors play a major part because they're putting in huge sums of money. And the other category, the influence, is the head of the athletics federations or the Olympic Committee. Do they want to spend 3 weeks in a place?
Right.
You'll be surprised to notice that they go to London and Paris and Los Angeles, all these nice places. It's quite surprising. So it's absolute rubbish to say that the sponsors have no influence. They have a key influence because the Olympic Committee know that they can get the money out of them for a certain location.
Now, while I was looking into this, I discovered pretty easily that Coca-Cola has a vice president on human rights. Did you know that?
I didn't.
A man named Paul Lally. Sadly, he's not on Twitter, otherwise I'd have been onto him by now. And his actual job is to oversee the company's human rights policy and due diligence. I'm wondering how he could have signed this off. You know, this guy is in charge of Coca-Cola's human rights policy. How can he kind of square that with this decision?
Well, you've tried to ask him.
I will do.
There is, of course, an irony, is that there were two places competing for the location of the Olympic Games now. One was Beijing and the other one was Kazakhstan.
Oh, great.
So it wasn't a great choice.
Yeah, all we need is Russia now. I think we've done that, actually, Sochi.
We have. But as you say, you have a human rights executive. You have a policy which knows, you, Coca-Cola, know that it could be in some location which is questionable. And therefore, you ought to have a policy that is quite clear, that says we're helping this or we're doing that or whatever, to counterbalance that, or we are not going to be involved in this field. It's very different. If you are a company, Volkswagen or something, who sell cars into China, that's one thing. But you're taking a decision as a sponsor. And by the way, like you, I actually, out of courtesy, sent an email to Coca-Cola to tell them that I was going to make this speech in Parliament yesterday.
Yeah. And you got any?
No reply.
No reply. Of course you didn't. Well, look, if Coca-Cola isn't going to respond, and I think it would be courteous of them to do so, particularly to a parliamentarian, what can ordinary people do?
Well, what I said in Parliament yesterday was, it's a free world, as you say in the media. Alternatives are available.
Yes.
So people should stop buying Coca-Cola, register their disaffection with the product for the next 2 months until after the Olympics is complete. It's not a major sacrifice. And as I say, other products are available. It's perfectly reasonable. And interestingly enough, when I first started this only a week ago, before I made the speech in the Lords yesterday, I've had responses from places like Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, from Ottawa, from professors around the world. People are registering this. except Coca-Cola, who are not responding.
Absolutely, and we should say there are other sponsors too. Airbnb, you can in fact stay in other accommodation that isn't provided by Airbnb.
All other alternatives are available.
Very, very briefly, what about broadcasting organisations? People like the BBC, some people say they should actually not broadcast these games. Really briefly, what do you think of that?
Unfair on athletes. Athletes are at the pinnacle of their sporting career. They deserve the coverage.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lord Hayward, for coming in and talking about the cause. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Isabel Oakeshott. The show is back every Friday from 12 p.m. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan, but for now, I'll leave you with your weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Not for the first time this week, there's a cold breeze blowing out there, bringing some sunshine, certainly across eastern areas, but also quite a few wintry showers in the west, so sleet, hail, and in places some snow. Low pressure is dominating up to the north, and we've got this little kind of breakaway weather front bringing thicker cloud and wet weather to South Wales and southwest England. That's mostly rain, but it does have some snow mixed in over the hills of Devon and Somerset for a time. Further north, we do have some sleet and snow showers packing into northwest England, western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and we'll continue to see those wintry showers through the rest of the day. Much of the east, bar the odd shower, dry and bright with some sunshine, but it feels cold. Temperatures 3 or 4, add on that wind, it feels sub-zero. We'll keep a few scattered showers going across the west through this evening, but for most it turns dry and cold. We will see a frost forming, certainly early on, but look at this, more cloud and rain then comes in through the night, and that will have the effect of lifting the temperatures. So frosty this evening. By morning, most places will be back above freezing. As the wet weather arrives, it will bring some snow across the hills of Scotland, certainly for a time on Saturday morning, but mostly it's just a wet old Saturday morning, and the rain likely to turn heavy at times over England and Wales, particularly through the afternoon across the south, with some gusty winds along the south coast too. Many places, though, brightening up through the afternoon with some sunshine, and after we start pretty mild, temperature actually dropping a little bit through the afternoon, but still milder than it has been. Quite a few showers then coming into western areas during Saturday evening. Some snow likely to continue over the higher routes across western Scotland. And then we go into Sunday. We'll keep the showers going in the west, certainly initially, but much of the east will be dry and bright. And for many, we should see a bit more sunshine on Sunday compared to Saturday. Goodbye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Neil Oliver. You can join me live every Saturday evening for opinions and discussions about the week's top stories. There's also a smattering of history and archaeology and features that define our great British Isles. You'll hear my thoughts unfiltered, as well as those of my guests, and we don't always agree. And we want to hear from you too. Neil Oliver Live, Saturdays from 7 on GB News.